Friends, welcome. Thanks for joining for this reading session. Today we'll start with an introductory look at a criticism. What would it be like for a non-believer to publish a commentary on the Christian Bible? What would that reveal about the way believers and non-believers view this most important book? Well, we're very fortunate to actually have that joy. Isaac Asimov, during his lifetime a professor and an author who was well known, did author just such a book. Isaac was a humanist. He was a secularist. He was an atheist. He had a PhD in chemistry, was a noted author of science fiction, and he was a non-practicing Jew. He lived roughly 1920 to 1992. And though I'm a believer and a Christian, I have a great admiration and esteem for so many of his writings, both fiction as well as nonfiction. And so to have his work here is actually a blessing. Any criticism that I will offer is meant to be gentle. I don't want to misrepresent him with it. I would rather be a foil to his treatment than to treat him as one. That is to say, I would rather be a Parmenio to his Alexander than be an Alexander to his Parmenio. There will be places where I disagree with what he says and offer a criticism, but hopefully as a critic I will get him right enough to be a charitable and reputable critic. Asimov's Guide to the Bible was published in the 1960s, and later it was published in 2 volumes and later put together in a 1-volume edition in 1981. The 81 work is what I'll be looking at here. It is, of course, a secular commentary about the Bible. And its organization and scholarship is appreciated because it's rare to have a commentary written by a non-believer, let alone a commentary written by a credible and reputable opponent. Professor Asimov, in his writings, has a clarity of communication that is admirable. And I believe when one looks at his commentary, one can really have a good flavor or sense that he is a legitimately excellent representative of mid-20th century secular humanism. For this session, I just wanted to talk about the introduction, go over that together. We can see here how he starts. Professor Asimov talks about the influence of the Bible in history. And he shares as a motivation that he wanted to treat with the secular aspects of the Bible. He notes in careful detail that the Bible is not a history book in a modern sense. This is not a surprise. This is not new, but it is clearly stated. To call the Bible a modern work or not a modern work is an interesting presupposition, at least in the way that most moderns seem to take it. That is to say, it's typically understood to be a pejorative, that the Bible is not a work in a modern sense. And so we'll see that Professor Asimov finds some things that he disagrees with. He's critical of the Bible in certain ways. And he talks about it here in his introduction and in the commentary. So he describes the perspective the Bible provides, and he tends to use language that implies the Bible is incomplete and lacking in perspective and balance that a modern work would have. So because of this, Professor Asimov makes the lament in his introduction about some imbalances in history. He casts doubt that there were people like Nimrod or the Queen of Sheba who was in the book, and doubt that they even existed. And then from that, he will cast aspersions about those places and things that the Bible doesn't mention, but that the professor thinks should have been. So there are criticisms of perspective that the professor mentions. People who should be minor players, or in his view, it is doubtful that they even exist, become exaggerated historically. The same thing with places, geographical locations. There are places that are mentioned, but not in relation to their balanced place in history. Backward places are overemphasized, and important places are not mentioned at all. So here he mentions Syracuse or Thebes in Egypt. And he compares them with little towns in Canaan, Israel, such as Shechem and Bethel. Professor Asimov is trying to do something specific here. And in his own words, I am trying, in short, he says, to bring in the outside world. illuminated in terms of the biblical story, and in return, illuminate the events of the Bible by adding to it the non-biblical aspects of history, biography, and geography. The professor continues in the introduction, and he notes the difficulty with making specific dates and assigning them to individual events in the Bible. So he creates instead biblical periods that he will refer to. This illustrates a situation that many have faced. Dates in antiquity are notoriously difficult to establish. We just don't have the provenance to allow us to settle for certain the chronology, order, and impact of so many events in history. It's hard to be specific in many cases. The professor makes a great point here in his introduction that he says, I cannot pretend that in writing this book I am making any significant original contribution to biblical scholarship. Indeed, I am not competent to do so. This is endearing to me. The professor states just where he's coming from as best he can, and his best effort appears to be, that of trying to shed the light that he can bring. He says it is his hope that the material will be interesting to the average reader of the Bible. I think we'll find that to be the case. I'll make a similar caveat. I cannot pretend that in criticizing Professor Asimov's book, that I'm necessarily making the best critical response to him. I may not be competent to fully understand him. As a believer, it's going to be hard for me to understand his unbelief. And as a non-believer, I think it'll appear that it'll be difficult at times for Professor Asimov to establish and understand that which faith leads to. So he takes some time and he provides some notes and some sources for his source material throughout the work. And we will see just how the result is as we go through together, and as I try to interact as a Christian with a non-believer's commentary on the scriptures. I hope and pray for godliness to offer an edifying criticism. I hope and pray to communicate my admiration for the professor, even where I disagree with him. And I hope and pray that these criticisms illuminate the differences between a believer's commentary as well as a non-believer's commentary, and is in some way edifying for believers and non-believers alike. Let's look at the scriptures together.